Welcome, everybody, to This Week in X, presented by Crushing Comics. I'm here with my colleagues, Tyler and Harry, to talk about New Mutants number 14. It is out on the 16th of December, 2020. It is our first issue of New Mutants after X of Swords. It is our first issue of New Mutants with new incoming writer, Vita Ayala. We practiced, and I think I said it right. So before we get any deeper, spoiler warning, not only will we pronounce some creators' names correctly, I can think of at least two more we're going to pronounce correctly, but we are going to spoil the whole history of X-Men, the New Mutants, Krakoa, everything, including how to pronounce the names of some of these creators. So if you don't want spoilers, this is the wrong program for you. But if you do want spoilers and a deep, deep discussion of this issue, here we go. Let's talk about first and overall impressions before we dig into this. And oh boy, is there a lot to dig into. But Tyler, why don't you go first?
Overall, I think that New Mutants is good, but not as good as the issues that came out past 2 weeks. It is missing a little bit of that magic touch that X Factor has, that Sword has. In some ways, I feel bad saying that because I kind of enjoyed the issue. I just feel that it's not as strong as the offerings that came right after the crossovers. But I think I mentioned it before. The art of Reese looks so much like Sienkiewicz here. That is kind of scary. Scary, good. Not scary, bad. So
this is a really pleasant book. It definitely feels low stakes. And you're right, Tower, compared to others, it doesn't have that kind of like thrust or kind of specialness, I guess. But like reading it, I just kind of had a really nice time, like kind of catching up with a bunch of like characters I hadn't seen in a while that are all basically on like a summer camp adventure. That's basically what this book is. And, the art's really, really great. And it's raises some interesting questions about the this culture they're all nurturing there. And it's just like a nice time. And I know that sounds like it's a backhanded compliment, but I honestly don't see it that way. I enjoyed myself.
Well, I want to make a bold statement here, which is that I think Vita Ayala came in here with possibly the most interesting set of plot points that we have seen of all of the books that have come out after X of Swords, and we're going to get into them. But we're talking Shadow King, we're talking mutant synergy, we're talking clone problems. This is what we all want, I think. Right?
These are the big ones, yeah.
I think on execution, there's a certain looseness to this where some of the stuff just needs to be a little bit differently considered. Like just certain captions didn't hit how they could have. Certain voices when there were a lot of people on the panel didn't hit how they could have. But I'm feeling optimistic because I think this is the right story, and I think this makes good use of the fact that this book is New Mutants. I think, there's a chance to turn New Mutants into like yet another team of a bunch of young people kind of wandering around in a circle. And I think that Brazan did a good job of like being like, let's use these characters for a reason and not just make them the ancillary young X-Men team when there's no X-Men. And this gives me hope that we're going to deal with some plots that are very much tied to New Mutants history, and that some plots that very much feel like they belong to this cast. So on execution, did I love it? No. But on like, are we moving in the right direction? Do I love it? Actually, quite a bit.
Yeah.
Which starts and ends with the Shadow King. So, I think we have to start with, why did they bring back the Shadow? Who? What?
Yeah.
So I was like, is he really back? And Harry went and found the panel, which was from what?
Empire X-Men number 2. It's the crossover that had just ended recently before X of Swords, and just in the background in the scene.
That's not a crossover. That's an event.
I am sorry. You're right. An event.
It's X-Men Plants versus Zombies. Okay, let's get it straight. It's the tie into the popular mobile game.
And I remember reading it when it came out. I would watch that so hard. When the book came out, like you see all the villains walking out, and I'm like, that's the Shadow King in the background. That seems like a bad call to bring him back, but he's here and he looks great. So,
but we kind of have to separate between Shadow King and Farouk.
Yeah. Right. That's part of what's so fascinating about this.
Exactly. For me, I feel like, okay, this is another rehabilitation of a villain, because you start him off with a sad story, and then he got somehow hooked up with the demon forces of Shadow King,
The entity.
Because I think for the longest time we associate Farouk as the Shadow King, but I feel like even from the beginning, Claremont may have written them as written Farouk as a host body of the Shadow King instead of them being, one and the same.
And I'll admit, you would have to be a real expert in like pre-revolution, late 300s Uncanny X-Men and like Cywar and Psylocke capturing the Shadow King and her psyche and all that to like really explain this well, which I'm certainly not. I don't know, is anyone or either of the two of you?
No.
Not my particular focus. We'll get there eventually. So I'm not saying that I'm the right person to explain that particular slice of continuity, but I do think that it's interesting because of the Legion TV series, if anybody watched that, which is spectacular. And that really focused on how scary Emil Farouk can be as a person, separately from his scariness as the Shadow King. And so I think that's part of what there's some allure to this here. Like, yeah, it's a retcon, maybe. Yeah, it's making us feel a little sympathetic to him. But like, if we can actually make a distinction between like him and the reason he's like he is and the reason he's independently scary and then the scariness of the Shadow King, I actually think that that's potentially really interesting. And what this intro kind of reminds us or gives us for the first time, depending on how well you know this material, is like Emil Farouk was a mutant with powers even before this whole Shadow King jam.
What's interesting is that you're both pointing out different paths this can take, where it can be a real rehabilitation of a villain to become more of like a Krakoan citizen, or it's an exploration of a villain's humanity to show a more intimate kind of villainy and cruelty and what have you. I didn't know that I wasn't aware of most of what y'all said. I knew the Shadow King. I knew the Shadow King, who he was, and kind of like his whole deal, but I wasn't aware that it was kind of like he was bonded with an entity like that. But it worked really well for me, that entire scene that kind of like showed him before he got all evil.
Ayala dropped like hints of things happening on Krakoa, probably due to influence of either Farouk or the Shadow King. So then, I don't know if they are actually trying to rehabilitate him, or but then if not, what is he doing here? Like, what is he doing on Krakoa?
What's your deal?
And wouldn't you think that he would be one of those people that they like right after that mission they would be like, come this way, please, sir.
Come this way.
Yeah, like we've got to. Yeah, you need to leave. It just seems like a little bonkers to let that roll. But let's actually put a pause on that, because Tyler talked about things happening on the island. I want to talk about the island and the things happening and Krakoa as a society. So here's my thesis statement for this portion of our discussion. The X-Men used to be synonymous in one way or another with a school. They're always, coming back to the mansion, which was an academy, or being based out of places that were a school, or even when it's not a school, they're like, what are we going to do about the students? It's always kind of a drumbeat, right? Here's the first time that the X-Men is a society that doesn't necessarily have a distinct school. And yet, more than ever, mutants have to be responsible for the protection of the race, not just as soldiers, but as part of this growing idea of mutant dynamos. It is all about synergy. If we go back to Powers of X, that was the whole thrust of what we learned in all of the charts about the kind of levels of society, and that if mutants are ever going to kind of achieve escape velocity, escape from their hatred and fear and potential extinction, they have to form these ever-growing dynamos. It's about synergy. So now we have this very interesting dichotomy where it's not all about school. Not everybody has to become a soldier, but if you relax those bonds too much, do you lose the ability to get to the place that Krakoa needs to go? Which, in terms of fascinating ideas that this book has thrown out, we've known this kind of thrum in the background about this topic, but I really feel like here with the letter that the New Mutants, or the former New Mutants, send to Xavier, characterizing how the youth are doing on the island, it really brings it into crystal clear focus of like, they're not going to survive. Moira's 10th life is not going to work unless the kids have some direction. Are the kids all right? Tyler.
The take that I took from this synergy thing is exactly what you said. And I mean, I had the same kind of feeling when I was reading Sword last week, because
talk
they
about
deal
that.
with
So there's a connection for sure. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, they I think so far in Dogs and Rocks, they're the first one that mentioned mutant as a machine, right? So they were melding them together. They were doing things like that. And I mean, not melding them together, but like, you know, using
Their
the powers
powers,
together,
right. Yeah.
you know, in a
Like
in a synchronized, in in a synergistic way.
Mhm.
So in this sense, I think it is good that the New Mutants, or you know, the former New Mutants and Warpath, you know, in his oh so casual attire, is like trying to train younger mutants to work together. I mean, I do question a couple of things, like, you know, why are they not studying? Like, you know, I
for
mean,
what
you
future? Studying for what career? Like what?
That's right.
Well,
They're on an island that grows them bagels.
yeah, but
what do you need to do after that? You're done.
But
You've made
knowledge-
it.
Bagels grew on trees. Would
important.
any of us need a career?
I'd never go.
But
Well,
knowledge is still important, I
Right.
think. Like, I mean, if you don't know things, you can make new things.
Well, that's what's. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
And that's what's so thoughtful about this book, right? Is that it's saying, you know, all right, we're at a new island. It's a mutant paradise. It's a haven. It's utopia. But it's like, all right, so like, what do you do?
Yeah.
And the answer they say is, well, we're probably gonna be lazy and not have focus and kind of, as you were saying, not be what we're meant to be with the dynamos. And it's just like a very thoughtful idea, like where to take this book. And to talk about the connection with Sword with the synergy, I like that this is kind of talking about the same ideas, but in the execution, it's just so much more kind of like down to earth, relaxed. It's not so high minded. It's just looking at all these characters using their powers in different ways. And it's showing like this idea of like mutant synergy and kind of evolution in a much more like character based way, which I think is fun.
And I think too that it's cyclical, right? Like these kids are here, they don't have direction, they're not learning. They're not learning to use their powers. They're not learning from the history of the X-Men. Here we have the Shadow King, who was at the root of so many problems with the X-Men in the past. And they're susceptible because, for the same reason that the X-Men were susceptible in the past, because they're not learning from our past. And then especially when you plug in that Mora had a huge connection with that Shadow King plot, potentially used Shadow King and Legion, or Legion was used by the Shadow King and Mora or something to kill Destiny. And all of a sudden you have this very interesting interwoven tale about like, can we actually improve if we're falling prey to the same thing we did before, which is the Shadow King extending his influence, which brings us to the team and their nightmares. So we open on this delightful scene of Danny and Karma, two characters I love, two characters who are here being treated as though their psychic powers kind of make them the de facto therapists for the team. Danny, because she can bring out people's worst nightmares, and so she has a sense of their fear. And Zan, because she has to subvert people's wills, so she understands what their wills are or can be. And so we have them kind of doing this talk therapy for each other, which is really interesting, and getting into Karma's nightmares, which have happened before X of Swords, but continue, and they're just taking different shapes. And there's a boy in her nightmares who she recognizes but cannot place, and the boy hates her. Tyler, what is happening here?
I mean, my first thought was like, oh, it has to be Shadow King. I mean, it has to be linked to that, because Karma for a while was actually under the influence of Shadow King, and she grew, and Shadow King, you know, made her grow really, really big and fat, and
maximize the use of her powers, such that she had many people enthralled, not just her normal, like, I have this one person.
And then, you know, but then the representation of the person that hates her in Karma's dream is dressed, I think, in what looks like a Japanese attire. So I'm not sure if the link is totally there with Shadow King because of that, the boy. So that's the part which sort of like threw me off a little bit. So I'm not 100% sure if this is Shadow King or this is something else.
Well, and there's also the interesting idea that if if canonically, like, we have to decide if the Shadow King was there all along or if they just brought him out of deep freeze for Empire, and like if her dreams would have predated that, and if this dream was a troubling dream for Karma no matter what, but now it's being kind of infected even worse. That's why I like this, because there's layers, and we kind of get the sense that they've all been having trouble resting. You know,
Yes.
Rain says, you know, when it gets to be too much, which with Rain could really be about anything, because Rain is too much. Her whole life, unfortunately, as a character has been too much, but they're all going through trauma, and that's kind of the whole hallmark of this original era of New Mutants, is like they've all been birthed through drama. So of course they're all having bad dreams, as opposed to these kids on the island who they're supposed to be raising in this utopia where they shouldn't be having bad dreams, right? Mm-hmm. And so this all comes to a head, you know, with a lot of funny back and forth with Doug, with Magic, with Rain, and then Warpath arrives at the door, and he's kind of the odd man out here because he was recruited to be part of this training squad, but Warpath is not historically part of this group, and they've got him in some short shorts too, it must be said. They use him as a sex object in this very deliberate way, where it's you know, we get this great reverse of the female gaze on this guy, and he's complicit with it because he's joking back, and it's really nice in a comic panel to get that gaze reversal. I thought, you know,
I was wondering, you know, since when did Forge give him his shorts?
It was the Forge outfit.
Totally borrowed it.
It was totally the Forge outfit. I was thinking that.
That was a really well done page as well. I mean, he looked good. That's
I mean, he didn't have the collar and everything like Forge, but it definitely was nice.
I know.
The shorts were meant
he's
to
like,
remind
you
us
know,
of those
it is
shorts.
more comfortable.
He kind of looked like a camp counselor also.
Yeah.
Like that's his vibe in that scene.
I'm into that muscle shirt with the blue bands and the X.
Yeah.
That was cool. I just don't necessarily want the athletic shorts with that cut necessarily.
Fashion icon Warpath here to
Well, and here's a good point to take a breather and talk about the artwork, Tyler.
Well, I mean, I mentioned it many times, so I want to hear what the two of you think about the arts here.
Yeah, I love Rod Reis. I think he's incredible. I think it's kind of probably my favorite portrayal of Krakoa, because it is just the nature. The forest area just seems so kind of warm and almost never ending, and it just seems ethereal in a way. And you know, I think his fight scenes sometimes are a little stiff. I think he's kind of improving on that, but just the facial expressions in particular are so good. And for a book that's all about like little interactions like this, it's the perfect fit.
I also love that, you know, when we had him week after week with Noto during X of Swords, we were talking about how clean and refined his look is here. But here it's savage, which is part of the Sinkovitz tradition. And he's, you know, noted as what made New Mutants really break through. And you can see it here in the way that Rice draws Warlock, just this very misshapen, jagged. We get this one face floating over James's shoulder, and you can't even decide what part of it is the mouth, which is not a critique. That's how Sinkovitz drew him. He was this very organic piece of technology. And I think also in the way that he kind of just draws slashes around everybody and kind of distorts the environment, even though he's giving us this really great facial acting, like that's what makes that connection with Sinkovitz. And it shows the muscle that he's flexing, because his X of Swords chapters were not really like this at all. Which brings us into the fight. And I would agree that he has a little bit of trouble in fights, especially with these characters that he's drawing here. First of all, he's got to draw 8 characters fighting in the kids version of the fight, and then another 6 with the New Mutants. And their powers are these very amorphous powers. We got liquid, we got rocks, we got dust. So it's a
crazy fight.
Yeah, it's a crazy fight. And here's where I know I've been pretty positive so far, but I have to complain a little bit. I don't have to, but I mean, I will. I just don't know if either of these fights actually made sense as they were written and paneled. I didn't really understand what was happening in the kids fight. And then the New Mutants fight was supposed to be this big thing about all their sweet combo moves, but the caption boxes didn't really explain why it was so synergistic. And then the art didn't show really why. And then they also use an obscure use of Reign's power that just emerged in X-Men Blue. And so it kind of just like completely fell flat. I feel like there needed to be twice as many examples of synergy. The captions needed to be twice as long, and the art needed to like almost have a picture-in-picture like zoom in on the one thing that was happening, because even the most obvious one, which was Magic and Danny Moonstar synergy, Mirage, projections, range, extended by teleport dust, I looked at that panel 100 times, and I just don't understand how that's what we're seeing in that panel. So I really think the issue started to come apart a little bit for me during the fight.
No, I mean I completely agree. This part is actually the weakest part.
Yeah.
And the other question I have also is not so much the art here, but why are they doing it in the wild hunt
Well,
area?
is this
Don't they have
go
a
ahead.
danger area?
They
right?
have a danger island.
Yeah.
Maybe this is closer.
Specifically.
Maybe it's too dangerous for the kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. And they have Krakoa. I was going to say they have Krakoan gates to stranger room.
That's true. Yeah, you go up there. He does draw a great cat. Let's give him credit for that. He draws a kitten in this. It's both very cute and then becomes like more warlocky, and he draws them both very well. It's just cool.
Well, and also
Yeah.
like the synergy of James and Warlock is like Warlock makes a suit. Like we've seen it 100 times.
It's the
like what is like Warpath has other stuff about him. Like maybe he should have like reinforced his arm to make his strikes stronger, or he should have had his vibranium knives. Right? It just, I don't know. It kind of just felt very kind of like discount bin quality comics to me in this middle section, and it really bothered me because I'm like, there's so many good ideas, but this is what I mean about execution. There were just better ways to get us there, and it kind of robbed this issue of the impact it should have had, which should have been all about synergy, but it kind of made me flustered.
Which is the part that brought this issue down from to just good. Because I mean, this is the very confusing part. And there's one thing you mentioned, Harry, that you think that Reese's art brought the warmth of Krakoa. I feel like Noto's art is a little bit warmer.
Interesting.
Because of the color that he used, especially in Cable issue 1.
Yeah.
I felt that was like really warm here. I mean, here we do get that, but you also get like, the framing, the first part and the ending part with Shadow King, which felt a little bit cold and dark, and getting a little bit more sinister as the kids progresses towards him.
I also think Royce here plays a lot with lighting and the idea of kind of like magic hour. It's like at the beginning of sunrise or at the height of sunset, you get that magic hour where the light is almost kind of purpley gold and it's not just sunny. And the entire fight is kind of bathed in that purpley gold sunlight color. It never just feels like it's a bright sunny day. And I think maybe that's kind of the warmth that almost feels like a more romantic version of the landscape. Like it's almost the kind of lighting you would want for like a date, but here they are having this fight. But then he takes that same kind of purple theme, and you can see it in the way that he silhouettes the back of the characters during Scout and or Honey Badger's big speech, which we'll get to in a second. And he maintains that purple through the end of the issue, because purple generally is Shadow King's color on panel, and he turns it into this very lurid, it looks like a bruise, kind of purpley blue awfulness. So I really loved the color continuity through the whole issue, because the purple ran through and it made it look very romantic and very pretty and very warm, and then it made it look very creepy and very menacing. And it's actually the same palette, which is a really interesting thing to be able to accomplish in a 20-page comic book issue.
Yeah,
I mean, as you progress through, you also see the sun setting.
Right.
Also, so it gets progressively darker and darker and darker.
Now we come to a segment which I am going to call Honey Badger Do Care About the Ethics of Resurrection. Because we've been waiting all this time to just see Scout, Gabby, and anywhere really. And if you've read Tom Taylor's All New Wolverine or X-Men Red, you have learned to love this character, who herself is a clone of Wolverine, Lara, who's not a clone anymore, but Gabby is a clone of her. And Gabby raises her hand here and says, what happens if synergies make things more dangerous? And they're like, oh, it's going to be fine. And then she's like, yeah, but people die. And then they also say, oh, that's going to be fine. And she's like, time out, y'all, because I'm technically a clone. Maddie Pryor is a clone from Hellions, and word somehow trickled out that they're not going to resurrect her. And by the way, where is Evan, the clone of Apocalypse, who after some digging this morning, we realized died in Age of X-Man? We just thought he would have come back afterwards, but no, he's apparently still dead. So these clones are dropping like flies, and Honey Badger do care, because Honey Badger, Scout, Gabby is a clone. Thoughts?
Exactly.
Finally, we're having this conversation. Talk to me.
Finally talking
It's
about
great.
the hard questions.
It's great. It's super interesting. It's a great point she's bringing up because they have been doing this not very well, who they decide to bring back or not. And like all of her points are super solid, like to the point that even Magic agrees. And it's just like, yeah, like I've been wondering myself, like, what is the issue with the clones here? Why aren't we doing this? And like, if they continue down this track, like I'm going to be really happy about it.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely need to answer that question because, I mean, I don't buy Magic's explanation that, oh, they didn't bring Maddie back because she's actively harmful to humans and mutants. I'm like,
says Magic. Let's remember who the other force in Inferno was, right? That's a little bit less credible coming from Ileana Rasputin.
I know.
And freaking Apocalypse, even if you're worried about having two versions of the same person, Apocalypse isn't even on Krakoa anymore. He's got like a timeshare in Araco or whatever. He's not here. You can bring back Evan. I love that character, so I want to see him back. But it's like, yeah, I feel like I really do love the through line of like the kids are not super happy with a lot of the established structures and rules. This new society.
And the lack of rules, like the lack of definition. Yeah. They're like, it's that classic kids versus parents thing, right? Like, it's kind of like you said not to do this, but you're doing it. Like, I always try to get my daughter to not bite her nails. It's just not a great habit. We can clip them. And she caught me because when I play guitar, sometimes it catches and I'm in the habit of just, when I'm playing guitar. I know it's not cute, but I just do it because I have to trim the nail. And she's like, but you say not to bite your nails. And then I had to be like, well, I'm playing guitar and I was a serious musician.
It's different.
But it's different. Me. And like the Vita Ayala plays it perfectly here, and it makes the New Mutants have to be like, oh shit, are we the grown-ups? Like there's and you see that on Magic because Rice draws it beautifully, and then you get this great point as a reader where like, oh, Magic's going to be reassuring now. That's a great situation because you can tell that she doesn't believe it in the slightest, at least in my read.
Yeah,
and then they zoom in on Scout's face, like on Honey Badger's face. She's like, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
okay.
like, oh my God.
Well, and
I mean, she also, I mean, Scout did not ask one question. Where is Jonathan?
Yeah, we need our pet Wolverine.
Yeah, we need all the pets on Krakoa. The pets are all missing.
Tyler's ready for X-Pets editorial. I know he's been tough on you, but if you bring us an X-Pets one shot, X-Pets giant size, Tyler will get back and you'll be back in Tyler's good graces. But final go round here. There's so many other things, so many other moments that we could talk about. If you want to pull out one more thing from this issue for your final round, Tyler, what would you want to pull out?
I want to say that, well, the people who point out the problems are usually volunteered to solve the problem.
Yeah, so they wrote the letter. It's like, well, you put your name on that letter.
And Xavier's like, thank you for volunteering. I was like,
way to solve the problem. That's really funny. I think the last page looks incredible. I know that's not really much of a point, but like I think the very last page of Shadow King and the fire around the fire and just with that huge grin and just I think this is a phenomenal issue for Rod Rice with a lot of moments. Even if his fight scenes do have some issues, I think we've properly gotten into.
I think the only thing for me that like it's scratched to the edge is like, are we going to turn Anil into a kid again? Like he's one of these characters that we have to, that like anytime we need a familiar face that people kind of like, we bring him in, but then we like totally overwrite his personality in a different way than it was before. And it's like, fine, Shadow King's there, like I'll buy it. But I think Rice also had to draw the younger characters looking even younger because the New Mutants also look pretty young, especially Rain, because he's drawing her like that actress that played Rain in the movie from Game of Thrones. And so like, I think like it made Anil and Scout look even younger. And it kind of just like tweaked me a little bit. I love Anil. And if this is going to be the reason that he hasn't reacted to Rockslide's resurrection yet, because he's in the grips of the Shadow King, then good job, X Team. Way to put together that story.
I thought that too. I was like, are you still this young? There's no way. Like there's many other characters that have aged out of this beyond you, man. Like I know the Zeb Wells book, the New Mutants book has him like at the same height. And that was a long time ago. It seemed like a slip up, if anything.
We'll just chalk it up to a resurrection issue.
You do have
resurrection.
You do have different characters here which shouldn't be here, I think. I mean, why is Armor here? Why is Pixie here? They should be on Sword. They are the teleporters.
Well,
Krakoan
Armor's,
gate.
I mean, Armor's pretty busy up there right now.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess you
she's-
can kind of read it as like this happened just before that, or she's still on the island occasionally, but it just feels like there's so many young characters to choose from. Like, you
Exactly.
don't have to double
Yeah.
up.
She
and
was off
Peter,
like
you have someone else too, right? Like,
Mhm.
why is Petra here?
Yeah, but I don't understand. Like, I'm all about like integrate those deadly Genesis people in, but also, so I'm into that. And of course, I love Dust, and I always think there's more and better things to be done with Dust than have been done in the past. So look, I'm not complaining about seeing any of these people. I'm just saying, like, keep bringing us more, man. Bring it on. Just pile it on. Bring as many obscure mutants as you can. Make up as many more as you want to. We're ready.
Yeah.
And with that,
yeah.
I think we're going to wrap up our discussion of New Mutants number 14. So look, if you are looking for our This Week in X discussion of other books out this week, you've got to be looking for other videos on the channel. We post them all individually now because the conversations have grown to such depth. So please check them out. Please subscribe if you want to continue seeing more This Week in X and similar content from us. And on the behalf of Tyler, Harry, and myself, we will see you once again here on Crushing Comics.
Bye.